everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. I continue on our liabilities of whiteness, how whiteness hurts white people. And we are moving down the list. And thank you for watching the videos. And I'm hoping that it helps you to dig a little bit deeper and examine how we white people walk the world differently, and how we experience whiteness and how it affects our humanity, how it affects our connections to other people, and especially across race. So this liabilities of whiteness is that whiteness limits our ability to ask the question, why? Why? And maybe you remember, if you have children or work with children or have grandchildren or nieces and nephews, that 2 and 3-year-olds, when they start talking, love to ask the question, why? Why? Why is that? Why? And then you answer and they ask why again. Why? Why? And it might get a little frustrating sometimes, but it is how we learn. It is how we engage in critical thinking and really be able to get to the disease and not the symptom, right? For a horrible analogy, but to get to the root of the problem, to really dig deeper. And I think that in our existence as so-called white people and through our education system that is built on white supremacy, that there's a lot of things that as we grow older and we continue to ask the question why, we're told things like, because I said so, don't ask, I don't have time for that, stop raising your hand, stop asking questions. There's all different ways that I'm sure we could examine as all of us were raised in this system in America. If you went through the public education system, I can't speak for private school, but I'm assuming it's the same, is that whiteness limits our ability to ask the question why. And this is vital in our examining ourselves as we strive to be anti-racist. We must need to ask the question why, and not just once, but go back to our 2 and 3-year-old days when we would continue to ask the question why. And you really need to, when you're examining something or questioning something or learning about something, or again, you're curious, you're learning, you're trying to unlearn, you're trying to relearn, to ask the question why 4 or 5 times, right? And so, you know, we can use an example of the rates of infant mortality, or Black women dying. There's so many inequities and injustices that we need to ask the question why, right? So if we look at Black women that are dying in childbirth at 2 and 3 times the rate of white women in the country, and we ask the question why is that Black women in this day and age, still in 2023, are dying at 2 and 3 times the rate of white women during childbirth. And if we ask the question why once, we might come up with answers. Oh, well, you know, Black women, you know, maybe they don't eat right. They don't eat right during childbirth, right? Maybe we could go down that road. Or maybe we could say, well, you know, maybe they don't go to the doctors as often. Or, you know, whatever why that we might have put in, where we're putting the onus on Black women. And we're saying the reason they're dying is because Black women are doing something. And that's what the superficial, really error in our ways, in our limiting ability to really understand how white supremacy and racist systems work in this country, is because we stop at that one why, right? And we say, oh, well, Black women probably just aren't eating right. Well, why aren't they eating right? right? And so we could go down that road. Well, maybe they don't have access to healthy foods in their neighborhoods, where, again, generally speaking, many Black people may live, or Black women may live. Okay, they don't have access to healthy foods. Why? Right? So they're, again, asking the why. Well, in, again, maybe more dense neighborhoods, urban neighborhoods, where, again, maybe many Black women live in the city. There's no access to grocery stores because there's no space for parking, or there's no, we could go into all of this, or we could say, okay, well, why is there not access, right? Why are there food deserts? And again, and this will lead us to examining redlining, examining our capitalist system as to where Whole Foods is and where Whole Foods isn't, right? And why that is, right? As we look at, what constitutes sort of a good neighborhood, right? These are things and languages that we might use that, again, we don't ask, why do we call it a good neighborhood, right? So there's things that we must ask, and especially if we go back to, obviously, with Black women, and we go into Black women might not have access to health care. Well, why don't they have access to health care? Well, Black women, again, generally speaking, might be in predominantly service, industry, again, where insurance isn't accessible. Well, why, right? Or maybe they have access to doctors, but they're not getting the care they need. Why? Right? Well, because doctors have implicit bias. Doctors, there's plenty of research that shows that that doctors, white doctors, and again, some other people that might not identify as white still might fall into some stereotypes and implicit bias around Black women, listening to Black women's pain, Black women's symptoms. And so when we continue to ask the question why, we get to the systems, we get to the root, or what I call the disease versus the symptoms, and we move away from the victim being the reason why these things are happening. Because it's so easy in white supremacy, and why whiteness allows us not to ask the question why, or settle with that one question, why, and then you sort of get your answer where you're putting the blame on the person that's actually experiencing the oppression, experiencing the injustice. And if we leave it there and say, well, Black women just aren't eating right, so that's their problem, I can't do anything about that, and so it's not my problem, I don't have to do anything, right? But if we continue to ask that question about food deserts, about lack of health care, about barriers to transportation, about lack of health care in jobs, about redlining, and where capitalism, has deemed appropriate to have certain stores and not have certain stores, right? And access to whole foods and healthy foods, and gardens and public gardens, and all of these things, we have to understand that they are by design, okay? That this system is set up again, for hundreds of years. This is not my truth. This just is the truth when you start examining and researching, when you're open to understanding and asking the question, why? So please, when you are examining something or listening to something or trying to really find out what the problem is, you must ask the question 4 or 5 times, why? 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 In order to uncover the layers of systemic injustice and oppression and racist policies and racist ideas and all of this that goes with it. And you can examine that for all issues that we are dealing with, as to why Black and brown people died disproportionately with COVID, why Black and brown people, specifically Black people, are more incarcerated disproportionately than white people. Again, it goes through all our systems of healthcare, of education and injustice. And it really is teaching your mind to get that 2 and 3 year old question back in your head, and don't let someone just tell you because I said so, right? Because we have to be able to understand the disease in order to solve the problem, and not just looking at the symptoms. And if we keep thinking that we look at BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, people of color, in all of the horrific again, injustices and disproportionate experiencing through all of these systems, and we somehow just stop at that one why, then we are always just going to say it's their fault. It's just the way it is. If they just pick themselves up by their bootstraps, right? This is that mentality. Well, Martin Luther King said, well, it's kind of hard to pick yourself up by your bootstraps when you don't have any boots. And that's the thing, is that we have to find out exactly why is it that there are no boots, and who is, and not just who in terms of a person, but the system, right? As to why that is happening. And most of the time, if not all the time, it leads back to racist policies, racist ideas, legislation that is built on exclusion. And those are the things that we need to change. Those are the things that we need to re-examine and really look at to be able to change that the amount of Black women dying in childbirth, that should not be happening. Not 100 years ago and not now. For Black women giving birth in this country. When we have the technology, we have the ability, we know how to do this, that should not be happening. And so you have to be able to ask that question, why, and really look at all of the layers if we're really going to be able to solve the problem. But there's nothing wrong with Black women. There's nothing wrong with them. There's everything wrong with the systems that they are subjected to, and the racism and the injustices and the oppression that comes from all of us. But we as white people need to understand. Get choked up because it's just, we can solve these problems if we are willing to look at our whiteness, ask the question why, and solve these problems for all of us.